We're going to go ahead and get started and talk about preschool inclusion, our webinar part 3. And there'll be some additional resources that we'll be putting up for you that you'll have available to you, and I'll go over those in a little bit. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is to share with you a video actually from Anaheim School District. And so let's just get going.
The Preschool Inclusion Program is a program in which students that have been identified with special needs and students that have not been identified with special needs are able to learn alongside each other in a classroom on a daily basis.
It is a full collaborative classroom that throughout the entire day, my co-teacher and I collaborate and plan and implement our curriculum.
What I love the most is the fact that we have the opportunity to collaborate not only with us 2 teachers, but also with our whole team.
To have teachers for this type of program, it takes a special person. I mean, because you have 2 different teachers working for one goal. You have to have a really high standard, you know. So to have those kind of teachers for my kids, I mean, is huge.
The biggest breakthrough, I believe, is the success stories that we have with the individual children. The program's working. I mean, that's one of the goals of the program, is to provide an opportunity for all of our children that are receiving special ed services to be in a least restrictive environment where they can actually have opportunities to learn and grow alongside their typical peers.
What I like most about PIP is seeing how much growth they've made overall since they started the program, and how, most important, they've learned to help each other as children, and building those skills of empathy. We definitely seen some tremendous growth in that with our children. Seeing that evidence really validates the importance of the inclusion program.
I think we need more programs like this, you know, to have a setting like this. I mean, every student with special needs should have access to a classroom like the inclusion program.
Our mission and vision is to see more inclusion programs such as this, such as PIP, grow in our district, but also grow in other districts as well.
In our educational community today, everybody is pushing towards inclusion, and it's really important that we follow along. We see the benefits to every child. We see the benefits to the teachers. We see the benefits to the school community. And really what we are is we're trying to help these children to be prepared to be functioning and happy and successful adults. And that's for every child, not just the child with an IEP, but all of our children. And that's what inclusion does, is it prepares all of our children to be successful in their lives.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some key practices for high quality early childhood inclusion. And so there's a number of them that are really driven by the research. This is what the research says. Those programs that have been looked at that are inclusive and what really makes the difference. So we're going to talk about what it is, what each key practice is, and then look at some examples. So adaptations of space, material, and equipment, critical for especially kids who come with equipment. They might have walkers or wheelchairs or braces or communication devices that need to have the ability to be fluid in the classroom. So children with and without disabilities can access to the physical space, materials, and equipment. When needed, children are helped to gain access to and use materials in meaningful ways through adult scaffolding, meaning adults start by giving access to the information and then gradually over time fade as the child becomes more proficient at being able to use the materials themselves. The teacher and assistant set up the classroom areas and materials in ways that can be accessible to all children, but they dynamically organize the physical space, equipment, and materials to intentionally encourage children's independent and social skills. So for some children at circle time, they're going to need to sit in a chair. rather than sitting on the floor. And so making sure that the circle time is physically spaced so that they can actually do that. And then the preschool teacher, the example is the preschool teacher, Kelly, who's the example all the way through here. Kelly saw Tara, a 4-year-old child with cerebral palsy, use her walker to walk from the block area toward the art area during free time. Kelly intentionally prompted Tara's peers at the block corner to clear the alley next to the corner by removing some toys so that Tara could independently gain access to the space. Another key practice is adult involvement and peer interactions. And it's a fine line because the adult interaction needs to be in a way that doesn't become totally adult dominated. We talked a little bit last week about doing student-centered learning in student-centered classrooms where kids play a significant role. So we want to make sure that the adults are there, they're facilitating, they're moving around, but they're also backing off when they can. So the classroom has opportunities to participate in activities and routines with their peers. We should make sure that if children have any pull-out services like speech therapy or occupational therapy that gets done in another room, that they actually don't miss some critical parts of the school day. Adults plan and implement daily social play and learning activities. And there's a good balance between adult involvement and support for children's spontaneous social interactions. And then adults facilitate problem solving between children. So if children are struggling, we don't want to necessarily go in there and fix it for them, but to ask them to see if they can help resolve some of those issues. And adults, again, provide scaffolding strategies for providing positive, reciprocal, sustained peer interactions and relationships between children. And so our example today is that Peter is a 3-year-old boy who doesn't have any verbal skills at this point and has a developmental delay. During circle time, teacher Kelly invited another student, Andrew, to model for Peter the movements of a song he likes to perform with his peers. Watching Andrew use his hands to form the movements of the song was an effective way to help Peter imitate, learn, and perform the song movements independently. Clearly, as we've talked about in the last 2 weeks, how powerful the peer teaching can be, more powerful in some ways than adult teaching. So making sure that peers have enough information to be role models in those settings. And then another key practice for high quality early childhood inclusion is adults' guidance of children's free choice activities and play. Typically in any preschool classroom, you're going to have a time during the day when the children are experiencing free play. So what does it look like? Adults show enjoyment and availability when engaging with children during activities and play. So recognizing that we might be using a different voice tone, a different set of enthusiasm, a different quality of voice when we're doing play rather than when we're doing some teacher-directed activities that are maybe more academically based. Children have many opportunities to decide on activities, playmates, play topics that they are doing during free choice activity. So recognizing that during free choice, we've already done an analysis of what do children really enjoy to make sure that there are things that they can do in that free play time and space that gives them the choices of things that they're going to be motivated by. Children are given many opportunities to make choices during activities and playtime because making choices is a really important communication skill. And so for some children, especially children who don't use words to speak yet, making choices actually helps them, even if they make those choices through pointing or gestures or looking at, rather than relying on verbal communication, is really important. And then adults observe children's engagement in play and consistently support play using individualized strategies such as verbal and nonverbal prompting, modeling, commenting, asking questions, and eliciting other peers. So the example I have for you today is that Kelly joined Martha, a 4-year-old girl who was recently diagnosed with autism, During free choice time, Kelly used a visual activity organizer in the role-playing area to help Martha act out the steps involved in cooking a pretend meal for her friends. So you have a pictorial sequence of what to do rather than relying only on the auditory cues of first getting all the materials and then getting the food and then using the stove and then maybe dishing it out and then handing it out to your classmates. So another key practice for high quality early childhood inclusion is conflict resolution. Adults have set clear rules and behavioral expectations that are consistently communicated to children to encourage social behavior and prevent conflicts. And that may mean that we must rely on visual communication as well as auditory communication. So we may have pictures of what we expect the children to do, or maybe we have pictures of what we expect, what we don't expect the children to do, what we don't want the children to do, and we have a big red X through that. When children have difficulty resolving their differences on their own, adults join children to listen to all the children's perspective, acknowledging their views and feelings. Really being able to reinforce their feelings and recognize and allow them to have the feelings that they have, even if they aren't consistent with the kinds of setting that their peers have done. Adults try to focus on helping children find more positive ways for negotiating their differences so they can figure out ways, if I want this toy and you're playing with this toy, can we find a way for us to negotiate? And individual strategies are used to help children negotiate peer conflict and generate solutions. Kelly observed two children on the playground fighting over a new toy. You know, when we put new toys out, often everybody kind of gravitates to the new toy. She invited the two children to consider more positive ways they could both enjoy the new toy. One of the two children involved in the conflict has a communication difficulty in expressive language. So Kelly invited the children to look at some visuals that depicted some possible alternative solutions. So all of this takes a little pre-planning to anticipate that they're going to have a conflict and then to have the pictures ready. With Kelly's facilitation, the two children decided to take turns using the new toy by paying attention to an alarm clock that would indicate when to pass the toy to each other. So a way for them to still get what they were asking for, but not feeling like they're on top of each other. And another key practice for high quality early childhood inclusion is membership, the idea of belonging. Adults work together to create a classroom community to which all children feel they belong, regardless of their individual differences. And so sometimes what I see in the name of preschool inclusion is that children with disabilities are there for much shorter periods of time. And then maybe there's not a cubby with their name on it, or there's not a place to hang up their backpack with their name on it. We need to make sure that children have all the resources that the other children have so that they feel like they are welcome and belong. Adults develop a sense of belonging by planning activities and creating opportunities to help children understand and accept individual differences. Some kids may not be able to walk to the front of the room to be able to be, for example, line leader. So let's figure out a way for them to still be able to participate in the activity using some equipment. Opportunities exist for children to assume equal roles and responsibilities in the classroom, and adults intervene to prevent bullying or persistent teasing between children in the classroom. We need to nip that bullying immediately. We need to nip the idea of children picking on each other right away so that they learn that we have to learn to respect one another. Adults use positive and inclusive strategies for responding to children's individual differences. So the example I have for you today in Kelly's classroom is when a child asked Kelly why another child was using a different type of spoon during snack time, Kelly responded that the children can use different spoons as they grow and learn to eat different kinds of foods. She showed all the children the many sizes of spoons she had available for their use. Kelly showed examples of how younger children might need bigger or softer spoons, excuse me, and demonstrated how some spoons might be easier for some children to hold because they're built up handles and it's much easier to hold. So recognizing that we are all the same, but we might need different things along the way. And then another practice, key practice for high quality early education inclusion is relationships between adults and the children. Adults seek many opportunities during the day to engage in social interactions that are positive, reciprocal meaning they go back and forth, they're beneficial to both of the parties, and they're sustained. That means they last a long time. They aren't just, hi, how are you, and move on. They show enjoyment when interacting with children. Adults are highly responsive to children's interests as well as their emotional needs. So getting to know the children and getting to know what's important to them and recognizing that their interests are very, very important. So for example, you might have a child whose mother has just given birth to another a sibling. And so talking about the baby that's in the corner, the play toy baby, and making a connection to their new brother or sister. Adults use visual supports and additional classroom resources for supporting children's emotional needs and development. And I think a lot of visuals, again, help out here. The example is when 4-year-old Charlie seemed reluctant to play outside because of thunder he had heard earlier in the morning, Kelly read a picture book to Charlie about thunderstorms. When they finished reading the book, Kelly modeled for Charlie all the different things he could do if he felt uncomfortable while being outside on the playground. Kelly's shared reading activity and follow-up conversation helped Charlie feel better and encouraged him to join his peers on the playground. This is also what we're going to talk about a little bit later, and we already talked about this the last couple of weeks, but I have some examples for you of social stories. This is an example, a good example of using social stories. Key practice for high quality early childhood education is support for communication. Often young children have not yet developed the ability to use their verbal communication. So adults are responsible to children's initiated communication. And that's initiated communication, whether it's verbal, whether it's gestural, whether it's making a noise and pointing in a particular direction, or whether it's grimacing or smiling in reaction to what's going on. Adults facilitate social communication with children using a variety, again, scaffolding activities and strategies, including alternative means of communication strategies or systems. So as children are using different kinds of mechanisms to communicate, they might have little pictures of toys and they have to use the picture to show their classmate that that's what they want because they don't have verbal skills at this point. Visual supports, books, and classrooms resources are used to support social communication skills. And adults intentionally use alternative means of communication systems in ways that enable children to communicate and participate in classroom activities with their peers. So when my kids were pretty little, I taught them the sign language of I love you so that whenever I dropped them off at a babysitter or at their preschool setting or their childcare setting, I always gave them that sign of I love you. And they learned that early on. It was really helpful when they got to be in high school, and because they didn't really want me to say I love you out loud, because that's what happens when kids become teenagers. So the example I have for you on support for communication is that Kelly showed Martha, the helper of the day, how to use picture symbols of available snacks to help Andy, a boy with a communication difficulty, choose his snack. So let's say there's pretzels and there's raisins and there's goldfish, and you get to make a choice by pointing to the picture of which one. As Martha went around the table verbally asking each child to make a choice between two snacks, she used 2 picture cards of the 2 snacks to help Andy make his choice. So whether Andy uses verbal communication or not, whether he points to the picture, whether he looks at the picture, whether he picks up the picture, that's the beginning of communication skills for him. And then another key practice is adaptation of group activities. Children have opportunities to participate with their peers in planned whole group and small group activities. So whole group might be the circle time when the whole group comes together. And this is typically when we're doing the weather, we're doing the days of the week, we're doing the days of the month, we're doing what day is it today, we're just looking out the window to see what the temperature is and what it looks like. Also, we adults use embedded strategies and adaptations of activities to support children's active engagement and participation while also meeting children's individual needs. And then adults plan and monitor embedded strategies and adaptations to support children's needs and adjust activities as needed to encourage participation of all children in the group. And so sometimes what we need to do is, for some kids, we need to actually touch them when we call their names so that they recognize that we're actually calling on them. So we begin to build a set of strategies that are unique to their individual learning needs. During a small group art activity in which children were using paintbrushes to paint leaves they had collected outdoors, Kelly provided hand-over-hand assistance for Louisa, a child with fine motor coordination difficulty, to finger paint her leaves. The second part of the activity involved cutting through paper to form different shapes. And Louisa worked on one of her individual goals. That would be one of her IEP goals or IFSP goals that involved sorting out different shapes alongside her peers. And then another key practice is transitions between activity. Sometimes kids get so engaged in what they're doing that it's very difficult for them to stop the activity and move on to a new activity, often involving going to a new location. So we need to recognize that transition can be difficult for some kids, whether they have disabilities or not, especially for children who are new to a preschool setting. They are not going to be familiar with the schedule. So a couple of things that we can do to help is adults share responsibilities and flexibility and adjust their roles to prepare for daily activities and promote those smooth transitions. Adults collaborate to plan activities and supports for the whole group to ensure smooth transitions. And then specific individualized strategies such as visual supports. So we might have a little card that has, and I have some examples, pictures later on in this slide, that maybe the first thing is circle time. And then there's a picture of the next thing that's going to happen. And maybe the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to do an art activity. And maybe then the next thing is we're going to have snack. And maybe the next thing is we're going to go to recess or outside playtime. And so we have pictures of those, and we might even have Velcro on the back of them. And when we're finished with that activity, we can take that Velcro picture off to know that that's all finished. And that also gives kids a chance to see that, oh, in 2 more activities, I'm going to go outside to play. And if that's a highly preferred activity, that gives the student motivation to stay engaged. Specific individualized strategies. Oh, I already did that, sorry. The example is Kelly uses a soft musical tone to signal the end of transitions with the whole group. Sam, however, requires additional support to transition between activities. Kelly and her co-teacher created a picture schedule, just like I described, to go through with Sam, who finds it very helpful to look at the visual symbols of upcoming activities. And even like 10 to 30 seconds before the transition is going to occur, to show Sam the visual schedule so that he gets that in a few seconds, we're now going to move to a new activity. Also, when I was a preschool teacher, I often used my rain stick. I don't know if you're familiar with rain sticks, but they're really lovely kind of, they're cylinder shaped objects, and they have sand inside them, or little pebbles, tiny, tiny little pebbles, and they have little pokies inside. And I think it's a cactus that is used to make the cylinder part of it. And you turn it upside down and all the rocks come rolling down, and it makes this beautiful, almost like a rain sound. And so a nice way to help with transition without it being like a big whistle blowing or something that's kind of obnoxious. And so another key practice for quality early childhood inclusion is feedback, giving children feedback. And I talked a little bit about this last week. Adults give children sensitive, positive feedback, verbal and nonverbal, on their efforts, behaviors, and learning. And what we talked about last week was making sure that the feedback was clear, that they understood what we actually are reinforcing. Adults use different types of feedback. We use corrective feedback, positive reinforcement to support important goals like positive behavior, learning, and engagement. And then finally, adults frequently use feedback that focuses on children's efforts and the process of doing things. I'm so proud of you that you tried so hard. So even if they weren't able to accomplish what it is you set out to do, that you could see the effort is going on and you can see the child making that effort and you reinforce that effort, because that's called shaping behavior. So you're shaping the behavior. So Kelly observed Chris, a boy with developmental delay, working really hard to solve a number puzzle during free play. Kelly asked him how he was trying to figure out how to put the pieces together. When Chris explained his strategy, Kelly said, "I can see you're working very hard and your strategy seems very helpful." So even if it's not your strategy as the teacher, he's actually coming up with his strategy. Okay, another key practice, so very important, is family professional partnership. There isn't anyone who knows that child better than the parents, than the family. And the family is made up of many different figures. Sometimes grandparents are involved. Sometimes there's a single mom, sometimes a single dad. Sometimes there's a mom and dad. Sometimes there's two moms. Sometimes there's two dads. There's so many different family constellations that exist. But the important thing is to make sure that we are building those partnerships, because that builds trust. It's hard to send your child off to school. For those of you who don't have children of your own, it's hard to relinquish that and trust that people are going to do as good of a job as you're going to do as mom or dad. Procedures are implemented daily for encouraging bi-directional communication with families about children's individualized education programs and progress. So as we talk to parents and we give parents feedback on their children, we want them to understand that whatever they're learning, they should also be doing at home and vice versa. Staff are encouraged to participate in meetings with families on a regular basis. Families have opportunities to contribute information on their priorities. So what's important to the family may not be important to the school at this point. So we need to try to get on the same page. That doesn't necessarily mean that as educators, we need to convince families to have our priorities. It just means that we must listen to what the family's priorities are and adapt to those and encourage those. Families have opportunities to contribute information on their priorities. Families are invited to provide feedback on the quality of the program. So the example that I have for you today is that each child in the preschool program, in Kelly's preschool program, each child has a communication book in which families and teachers can exchange daily messages, including private notes. Kelly also uses email daily to communicate with families. At the end of each day, classroom staff post messages about the day's activities and children's experiences on a whiteboard outside the classroom to share with the families. And that assumes that the families are actually picking their child up as opposed to their child getting on a school bus. Kelly's programs also provides support for staff to attend intervention planning meetings with service providers and families. To exchange information on children's progress with families, the program actively encourages families to participate regularly in progress meetings and shares reports of children's progress that are parent-friendly. I can't stress that enough, that are parent-friendly. We don't want to use a lot of education jargon and words that parents may not be able to understand, because they should be sensitive to the cultural and linguistic diversity of the families. Kelly's program also uses a system for identifying family priorities, concerns, and resources to assist with meeting children's needs. And so recognizing that and how important that is. I think early on I mentioned that I have a nephew who has Down syndrome and autism, and when he was in preschool and in the early primary grades, he really didn't use very many words to speak. He relied a lot on gestures, he relied a lot on visuals. And so one of the things that his communication specialist did for us was she would send home an envelope that was sealed, and in the envelope was the answer, but the question was on the outside of the envelope. So what did you do today in art, for example, or who did you play with on the playground? And the idea of the answer being inside the sealed envelope was that we would work harder to actually hear Michael say the answer rather than just assume we knew the answer. So it was actually a really productive way for us to be able to understand a little bit more of Michael's communication and actually shape his communication skills, particularly his verbal communication skills, over time. And then another practice is monitoring children's learning. We're obligated to do this by law in terms of making sure that children are meeting their IEP goals and objectives, but there are a lot of other reasons too, and a lot of other ways in which we can get to this. So the program uses multiple assessment methods for monitoring children's progress on individual goals. We don't want to rely just on some developmental checklists that we do every 6 months or once a year. We want to recognize that ongoing assessment is really important. The program uses a combination of research-based formative assessment tools, observation notes, behavioral assessment checklists, and various other teacher-made tools to get a broad sense of how this child is doing. An individualized intervention plan for each child is developed based on identified needs and specifies how interventions and supports can be embedded in classroom activities. So when special ed teachers are collaborating and co-teaching with general education preschool teachers, they're sharing this information back and forth. All classroom staff have access to assessments, intervention plans, and progress notes from specialized therapists they use. And then they use the information for their own planning. So if an OT or a PT or a speech therapist comes in, twice a week or something, that they provide the information to the staff on an ongoing basis. Planning includes interventions that support children's needs in their homes and communities, and progress monitoring data is used to adjust interventions and instruction. And so the example I have for you today from Kelly's classroom is that Kelly was keeping a running record of Maya's participation during story time to monitor her engagement following a recent embedded activity they had started implementing a few weeks ago to support her understanding of story facts. In her notes, Kelly recorded that Maya found it useful to use story props to act out the story prior to and during retelling of the story. She also noted that Maya might need more frequent prompting by an adult to help her connect to the events of the story. So ahead of time, before story time, what the teacher might need to do is to pull together a series of materials that a student like Maya could use to help actually reenact aspects of the story, to help get to her understanding of the story, because she may not be able to tell you what the story was about, but she may be able to, using some materials, reenact some aspects of the story. Okay, we're gonna stop here and we're gonna go to questions. And I'm going to see if I can find who's going to be going through the questions now.
Okay, Mary, hi. Can everybody hear me okay?
Anybody there who's looking at questions?
Hi, Mary.
Anybody
we're here. I unmuted Liz, but we're not able to hear her.
Oh, okay. Can you read the questions? I could probably go in and look at them.
I can read them. I can't hear you read it either for whatever reason. So.
Okay, sure. All right.
We're struggling today, but the question that I see, someone is saying, I mainstream special education students. What is your opinion on the length of time spent with general ed class?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question. My concern about the context of that question is that I want to avoid children with disabilities feeling as if they're visitors in the classroom. And so you don't want to create the idea that they come in for, let's just say, story time, or they come in for a music lesson. Because if they do, they're not going to actually feel like they're members of that class. Whatever we do, we want them to feel like they really belong. They're really part of that environment. And so I would say shooting for a full, it depends on whether it's a full day preschool program or a half day preschool program, but for the duration of the time that the preschool program actually occurs should be the duration of the time that children with disabilities are included. Now, there may be times when a speech therapist needs to have some more intensive instruction time for a child and will pull out an individual child. But I think if you're a mainstream teacher, that the more time you're together, the more time you're going to have to learn from, they're going to have to learn from each other. So I wouldn't limit the time.
Can you hear
Okay,
me?
the next one is quite long. I don't know, Ireda, did you want to try and speak?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we're still not hearing you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm unmuted
Well,
on my.
I will do my best, Mary. It says, what's your recommendation when special education staff who work with children with IEPs want to resume children's mainstreaming minutes in a regular, oops, it jumped, I'm sorry, in a regular preschool during current COVID guidelines? So that's part one. They say the concern is that the current CDC's cohort, group size, guidance, etc., requiring no mixing of children or cohorts to assist in mitigation of virus, etc. Staff, however, are concerned if they don't follow or resume mainstreaming minutes that are part of a child's IEP, they wouldn't be following the IDA regulations. Are there exceptions to following IEP plans? And if so, what resources, guidance can you share that would be helpful to staff and families to help make these kinds of decisions?
Ireda, can you hear me?
I think that's an excellent question, and it is loaded. It's got lots of component parts to it. So I think it's important that we not violate CDC requirements, but there are multiple ways in which we could do that. If by bringing in a preschool class of children with disabilities into the mainstream class, we've increased the numbers to be too large, then what if we took that group and broke that group in half and had, you know, half the non-disabled kids and half the kids with disabilities together and had two different groups together, so that we keep the numbers to a manageable numbers to where CDC is actually recommending it. And yes, I am going to actually refer you to some documents. I've given you a list of websites, and I don't know if they're up yet, but I've asked the West Side staff to put them into someplace on your, so you have access to them. But I'm going to go over those resources so that you know there are quite a few resources that the U.S. Department of Education has put out, that Health and Human Services has put out, as well as California Department of Education and the California Health and Human Services Office. So I'm going to refer you to those because those are probably going to be helpful to think about the kind of boundaries that you need to create in order to make sure that children are safe during these times, assuming they're actually in a face-to-face situation. If they're not in a face-to-face situation, if they're doing Zoom calls, there's no reason why their Zoom classes couldn't involve kids with and without disabilities, because they're not violating anything. They're home, presumably, and or wherever they're in their daycare center or whatever, watching the Zoom, although Zoom hasn't been so successful for preschool kids. So I think, is that all the questions we have? Oh no, there's more. Let's see.
So I'm trying to figure out the audio situation. So basically we can hear Liz and Ireda, but we can't. So I'm going to take care of that in a second. But the only other kind of question I see, someone said, would you be kind enough to repeat the communication example, i.e. envelope with the answer inside?
Sure. So let me contextualize it first, because I realize I didn't do that. So a lot of times as parents, we would ask our child a question and we already knew the answer to the question. So we were willing to accept something less than the best way for them to communicate because we already knew the answer to it. And so the idea here was to not know the answer, so the child had to work harder at being able to communicate what they ate at lunch, for example. That's a bad example because I would send lunch, but another example would be, what did you do during art time? And so the answer would be in the envelope and the question would be on the outside of the envelope that the speech therapist had prepared for us to ask him. And she had reviewed that with him during the day so that he had practiced the question and then answering the question. But then we wouldn't open the envelope until he had given his answer to see whether the answer the speech therapist gave us that he was supposed to say matched what he actually said. And so it helped to broaden his communication without us going, yeah. You know how sometimes grandparents will come over or aunts and uncles or friends will come over and they don't understand what the child is saying. And so they'll look at the mom and dad to say, can you help me interpret? You want your child to be able to be understood by as many people as possible. So the idea is to make sure that there's practice session for children to be able to say things in ways that other people could understand. So that was just one of the strategies that our speech therapist had used with us. So does that end the questions?
I think Rhiannon fixed it. Can you guys, can you hear me, Mary?
Yes, Narita, I can.
Okay, everybody else was able to hear me except you and Rhiannon, and it was a really minor problem that me enlisted in doing the beginning, but thank you guys for joining us. So one of the last questions I see on here is, I am a community organizing advocate at Drail with a child development background. I'm starting a youth program and want to know if I should also advertise to children that don't have a disability to encourage inclusion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because there's so many ways in which children without disabilities can help model for children with disabilities. And there's an awful lot of information and perspective that children with disabilities can teach the non-disabled children. So I think having that opportunity to have kids with and without disabilities in this setting is really powerful.
And we also have one more question. What are your suggestions during online distance learning to obtain the supports and prepped work from the staff for the child to be able to work on IEP goals? And before you answer that, can I just tell everybody we are also co-sponsoring a couple of trainings starting next week on distance learning. And I will send you guys the flyers via email. So if you'd like to register, both we're doing English and Spanish. And we're also going to send you some resources that Mary Falvey shared with us. And another person had also asked if the videos are in the PowerPoint that you share, or can we share a link to the videos?
So the slide where I am, kind of breaking to show the video, I've given you the link to the video, and they're YouTube videos. So they're available to anybody who has YouTube. So yes, you can get those. I'm going to also defer to the people who are doing online distance teaching to maybe more in depth go over that question. But I'll just tell you really briefly what I did. I was an inclusion facilitator actually for a second grader until recently. And we went into COVID, pandemic teaching in March. And so I did the rest of his school year last year. His teacher, his second grade teacher, he's been fully included since preschool, and his second grade teacher would upload worksheets onto the Google Classroom. And so twice a week, I download all the worksheets that she put up, and I would make a physical copy, a hard copy of them. And then I would go through with my markers and my colored pencils, and I would accommodate and modify. Logan is a second grader, but doesn't yet read fluidly. So we would need to give him some pictorial prompts and some other kinds of prompts so that he could still meaningfully participate in the second grade curriculum. And then after doing that twice a week, it turns out that his mom doesn't live very far from me. And so, and because I was protecting myself from COVID, I didn't go out, but my husband would go out and drop the material off at his mother's front porch twice a week, so that he had access to those materials that were now meaningful for him and that he could engage in and do without asking mom to do all those accommodations. So that's my response there. But I would definitely recommend and urge you to tune into the Westside Regional Center training that's going on, because there's so much to learn about. And it doesn't look like, especially in LA County, that we're going to be going back too soon. I think Orange County's gone back a bit, but I don't think we're going back too soon at this point. Are there other questions, Areta?
It looked like that was it for now. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, you're welcome. So I do want to tell you and note that, and Areta, maybe you can help me. How will they access the materials? I sent you a bunch of materials today. How would they access those?
We are going to be emailing all those to them tomorrow.
Perfect. So be watching for your email. One of them I entitled Great Internet Resources on Inclusive Preschool Programs. And in there's information on COVID and what the rules and regulations are. There's information on basically the joint statement between Health and Human Services and the Department of Education at the national level, and what they have to say about what our obligations are, what our responsibilities are. These are really wonderful resources. They're very current. I've really referenced mostly the current resources, especially from the U.S. Department of Education and Health and Human Services. There are a couple of resources on here from California Department of Education, and they're not quite as current as the ones from the U.S. Department of Ed, but they're very important in terms of the obligations that school districts have to, in fact, work with your local preschools to create inclusive environments. These are, and they're heavy documents because they're often written by, you know, bureaucrats who write in sometimes in legalese as opposed to simple language. But if you can get through it, it's really helpful. And a lot of them have a lot of resources. And then I've just included some other, I found some really wonderful websites as I was going through and preparing for today that I think would just be really helpful information. And then you do have the links for all the videos, the 2 videos I showed last week, and then there's 3 videos I'm showing this week. So that's this document. And then there's another document that I'm sending, that I sent to Areta. I actually found this on the Chicago Library website that has a huge list of really wonderful children's picture books about disabilities. It's pages and pages and pages long. So, and these 2 resources that I'm referring to right now are only in English, but I think if you need them to be translated into Spanish, you can contact the Westside Regional Center, Family Resource Center, and they can help you to try to figure out a way to get them translated into Spanish. I also wanted to point out that I mentioned this book. Oops, sorry. This is also in your packet of children's books. This is the book about Ed Roberts. If you remember on the first week, the first webinar, I talked about Ed Roberts being kind of the father of our civil rights movement and disability. And this is a wonderful, wonderful book written by Dinah Pastora Carson, who's a kindergarten teacher down in San Diego. And she wrote this book about Ed Roberts, and she wrote it at a level that young children could understand it. So I've included this in your packet. And then finally, last but not least, I mentioned this a bit last week too. I've sent a copy of the cover page of this book. This is called Inclusive Education Checklist, a self-assessment of best practices. Those of you that either run preschools or work in administrative positions or supervisory positions, this is a fabulous resource on a preschool looking at our current practices to see how well we are doing with regards to the quality best practices of inclusive education. So I would highly recommend you get it. You can get this on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. It's by Jackie Thousand and Richard Villa. And again, it's a fabulous resource. And so, and then one more thing I wanted to mention, and maybe Areta or Liz can chime in, but there is an evaluation, and the evaluation for this training, I'd really like you to fill out because it's good for me to get the feedback. But I think Westside Regional Center, Family Resource Center is also interested in what other topics would you be interested in signing up for and getting some information about around early childhood. So please fill out the evaluation, which I'm not sure where it is, but maybe Liz or Areta can tune in where it is.
Yes, we will be emailing that in the same, it'll be added onto the resources you provided to them, in addition to some other links that if I can add right now really quickly. So just so you guys know, our Family Resource Center has an FEC grant, a Family Empowerment Center grant from California Department of Education, which allows us to provide support to individuals who have an IEP Section 504 plan. So if any of you need support in that area, please reach out to us. You'll get our contact information on that email, but I'll also put it on the questions and answers so you guys can look at it. But we also have 14 other of these same organizations throughout California. So if we're not close to your location, you can definitely find an FEC that can support you. One of them is an partnering agency called TASK. that you'll receive in our email. The reason I want you to look up their website is because they provide support not only in special education, but they do a lot of trainings around assistive technology. And one of them is specific to how to adapt toys and books and using pictures, just like Mary has been talking about, which is really helpful as a parent and as a professional to be able to use those tools in your classroom or with your children at home. So you'll get all that by tomorrow. I apologize, we didn't have it ready by today. And today after this, we're all clocking into another Zoom meeting right away. So sorry about that, but you'll get all that tomorrow. Thank you so much for your patience and for your patience with our technology issues this morning.
Thank you, Areta. I really appreciate it. I think that's probably the COVID language. Thank you for your patience with our technology. So again, and I thank you guys for being willing to come back to webinar 2 when webinar 1 was not so great, but we did have the video. I redid the video and that was sent to you. So let's continue on. Oops. So choosing quality childcare for a child with a disability. These are just questions that if you're a parent or you're an educator and you're looking at local preschools to see whether or not it would meet the needs of your children, here are just a bunch of questions. Are the children engaged? Or is, that's the difference between a child-centered classroom versus a teacher-centered classroom. Are the children actually engaged doing something? Or are they sitting quiet and sitting still and waiting for the teacher to give the prompt? Our staff involved with the children at eye level, that is huge. And I know when I was a preschool teacher, I developed some back problems because I always had to get down at their level to be able to have a conversation with them rather than standing over them. Are rooms bright and cheerful without being overwhelming? Do adults speak positively about children? That's a huge difference. Children want to feel like they are motivated. Do adults call children by their names? Are there sufficient personnel to respond in the event of emergency? Is the timeout tactic overused? You know what I mean by timeout? Like child's not behaving or doing what I want them to do, and so we move them into the timeout chair on the other side of the room and they're excluded from the activity. I'm not saying it can't be helpful to take a timeout just to breathe deeply and to get my head together, but to be excluded over and over again is not very helpful. Are caregivers trained in early childhood special ed? And that you might not be able to see, but you could certainly ask questions. Are teaching staff available to attend school district IEP meetings with you? So even though the child might be going to a local neighborhood preschool, even a private preschool, they still will have an IEP meeting, and it would be incredibly beneficial for the teacher to be present at that IEP meeting because she or he can contribute in really important ways if they see the child every day. Do those who work with the children receive positive support? Do they hear a variety of developmental activities taking place? Do you see and hear a variety of developmental activities taking place? Do the children have opportunities to control objects or events in their environment? Or is it, again, all very teacher directed? Is there some sense of it being student led? Are activities based upon a child's level of functioning? Now, I'm not suggesting that if a child is functioning below grade level or below their age level that we would teach everything at that level. We would just want to make sure that we give access to those kids. Are learning materials accessible to children with disabilities? Will child care personnel help to develop a goal for your child and plans to achieve them? As a member of the IEP team, you would be actually helping to develop goals. Do personnel provide parents with regular schedules of activities and events that are going on? Do teachers and caregivers describe their communication practices as open, and do parents actively participate with their child or their children at that school? So these are just good questions to kind of keep in mind. And so I'm gonna read you a story. It says see handout, but I actually, maybe I'll send this to Areta before tomorrow so she has it. I'm just gonna read you this story because I think it's really powerful, and I think a lot of parents who are wanting to have their child included in a preschool setting have a lot of these same fears. Before Sam went to inclusive preschool, Jessica was a little nervous about how things would really work out. After all, you're treated like everyone else, she says. You get a little help, but you have to follow the rules of the class. You're not catered to like you are in a special education setting. Would Sam be able to succeed? She had other concerns as well. She wondered how the teacher would feel about this inclusive model. Sam can be a lot of extra work, Jessica said. She worried about whether he'd make friends, and I wondered if he would learn enough, if they'd be able to make sure things weren't taught at too fast of a pace. On the other hand, she knew there would be benefits. Sam learns best from his peers. He learns from watching, she explains. I know he'd be going to kindergarten in an inclusive school, and I wanted him to learn how to function, to follow routines and directions, participate in activities, and fit in. It has to start young. After weighing the apprehensions and the advantages, Jessica and Sam's IEP team believed the inclusive preschool would be the best thing for her son. A meeting with the teacher just before the school year began helped ease some of Jessica's concerns. The teacher made it clear that she was excited about having an inclusive environment and that inclusion extended to more than just having children with and without disabilities. The class also had children from many different countries. Nobody stood out because everyone was different in some way, Jessica says. The kids didn't see differences or judge them. Everyone was really welcoming. She especially liked the fact that she and the teacher agreed that an inclusive classroom would prepare Sam well for kindergarten. She said every kind of kid he'll run into in the kindergarten is here, Jessica recalls. That experience would be invaluable. Sam had a lot of support to be part of the classroom, Jessica says. In addition to the preschool teacher and an assistant teacher, Sam had a part-time special education teacher and a paraprofessional who helped him learn to follow routines, sit for story time, stand in line, play with other children, take turns, and share in front of the class. In short, he learned how to be part of the class. Sam's peers helped a lot too. Although the special ed teacher typically provided services in the classroom as part of whatever was going on, she occasionally thought Sam needed an additional practice on certain skills. At those times, a typically developing peer would join Sam outside the classroom, and the two would play games that enhanced those skills. Other times, if Sam needed help transitioning from one activity to another, the school would have a friend buddy up with him. The benefits of an inclusive preschool program for Sam became clear fairly early on. He was comfortable in the group, said Jessica. He loved preschool. He was so happy to go. That's how we got him dressed in the morning. He loved the other kids. It was such a social learning experience for him. It was so important. The importance became evident only a few months after being in the inclusive classroom. In testing between the summer before preschool and January 2009, Sam had a 10% jump in his speech. It's a more dramatic jump than usual, says Jessica, who attributes much of the gain to his inclusive preschool experience. Sam's classmates benefited from the inclusive experience as well, gaining compassion and awareness. Even though they couldn't always understand him, they realized he was just a kid who liked to play games, and they included him, said Jessica. So I will send you that link for that. It's from the PACER Center, which is a parent technical assistance center in Minnesota, and they have a lot of really wonderful early childhood resources. So I'm going to send you that link also so that you have the access to that. Okay, and now we're going to watch one more video. And some of this video that you're going to see is actually in Spanish because the parents are speaking Spanish and there's English subtitles underneath. Oops, sorry. Shouldn't have done that. I'm on this one.
quiero lo mejor para ella. Para mí ella es todo, es mi...
Oh, shit. Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Yo quiero lo mejor para ella. Para mí ella es todo, es mi tesoro. A mí, es mi milagro. Ella nació para mí otra vez. Y es lo que yo quiero para mi hija porque para mí es algo importante. Samantha estaba desde los 18 meses con Head Start, pero ha salido adelante con todas las metas que se le han puesto. Realmente estoy agradecido con todos en el programa, con todas las maestras que ella ha tenido, porque me le han tenido mucha paciencia y me le tienen paciencia.
I met Samantha in the early Head Start classroom. Samantha was a joy. She was this dancer, this really energetic little person who made you forget that she had a disability. Samantha came into the preschool classroom and won over the entire classroom. The children saw Samantha as a peer, as an equal, as someone they could play with and be with.
We color together, and we paint together, and we play together, and we play with her. Samantha, my friend, she plays. Samantha's nice friend, and she plays with me. Samantha, my friend.
And what do you do with your friend?
I play for her, housekeeping.
What about when we turn the music on?
She dances.
She loves to dance.
Samantha is very young in her development, but she seems to fit in very well in my classroom with the children.
Y es lo único, y es lo que yo siempre me he propuesto, nunca salir adelante, nunca irme hacia atrás. Y es lo que yo quiero para mi hija, lo mejor, hasta donde yo pueda ayudarle. Y mientras yo tenga la ayuda de los maestros y me apoyen y yo los apoye.
We have a program called the Great Ideas, which is special needs teachers from Fairfax County Public School that come into my classroom every day. They work with Samantha, and what they usually do, we set up before they come in or after. What are you working on today? Samantha may be working on building her fine motor skills or language, and they'll tell me these things. So Samantha is a part of the small group, large group.
What has made this work is because we all realize that it's not about me, it's not about the process, it's about Samantha. And I think we all agree on that. It's about what is best for her and what environment is going to be most beneficial for her to make the most progress.
The dad was very, very involved and, knew what was right for his child. And they're a family that are great advocates for their child. And so it's always good to see that.
Para mí ella, desde que ella nació, fue una alegría para mí. Y por eso mucho yo les digo, si es que ustedes no saben lo que yo siento por mi hija. Y respecto a, yo estoy feliz con las maestras porque nosotros los mexicanos decimos a tiras y a tirones, o sea, puchándola, pero no tratándola de puchar.
One of his main concerns, he said it to me the first day we met, I want her in a place where she's going to be challenged, a place where she's going to be able to learn and progress at her rate for what's comfortable for her, for what's developmentally appropriate for her. She's extremely fortunate to be in a classroom with Myra O'Leary, who has, since the very beginning, runs a very structured classroom runs a very visual classroom, and Samantha learns by visual. She's much more confident, she's much more interactive, she's much more of a participant when you have that visual support. She's got pictures of not just Samantha, of every child in that room doing different activities, and she uses those pictures as her daily schedule. And it was a natural kind of flow for her. We're at a point right now where she has turned 5 and she is transitioning into the public school system. And I've been trying to arrange observations from different schools, for base school primarily. But specialists, preschool resource specialists, inclusion specialists have come to observe her. We're coming to the end of that. My goal is to get as much information from different people in different disciplines to be able to provide the family with enough information to assist in making the proper decision come the time to make those placement decisions during the IEP.
Se vienen programas nuevos ahora en la escuela. Ahorita tenemos una junta para ver opciones que a ella le sirvan. También lo que no trato es de que ella me vea a veces llorar. Yo me lloro de alegría y lloro a veces de tristeza, no, porque yo siempre he dicho, yo a ella la he tratado como una niña normal. Y una vez una persona me dijo, pobrecita, le dije, ¿de qué me estás hablando? ¿Por qué pobrecita? Le dije, cuando ella entiende muchas cosas.
The programs that we work with are very familiar with our program. We do that through a lot of the relationship building and making sure that our families have the information and we help them to advocate in those meetings. So our expectation is that the other agencies, whether it's a school system, Department of Family Services, whatever, knows that our parents will be speaking up, will be asking the questions, and that we encourage them to.
What's really nice about our program is all the members of the team have some established relationship with the parent, and we all take a different role. So the spec ed team will work on educating the parent on what's going to happen next. Family services will talk about maybe what are the parent fears, what are their concerns, what are the things that they're going to need help on in understanding. So there are times where, the parent may have a meeting just with family services. There may be a time where they'll have a meeting with myself and the teacher because they really want to hear from an educational perspective. And then there's a time where the parent is with the special education team and they want to spend some time getting to know that team and then finding out the exact steps.
Salir adelante, apoyar al hijo o a su hija. Todos tener paciencia, no desesperarse y todo sale bien.
Just always maintaining that level of, just being positive, being open-minded and being flexible and being extremely sensitive to the family, to the classroom teacher, to the administration, to the ins and outs of the program that you're involved with.
My approach to parents, because a lot of parents are very open, because I do come from a positive, I'm not, your child can't. I'm always saying, what a wonderful things your kid can do. Look how nice, that hug feels. And another thing about Samantha, she's the best hugger in the world. She gives the warmest hugs you could ever have from a child.
El cariño y tratarlos bien y te regresan el cariño con creces, hasta más y duplicado los niños.
So I do want to mention that video just took place in a Head Start program, and that Head Start classrooms must provide, at least offer the opportunity for 10% of their student population to be kids with disabilities. And that's mentioned in some of the language of some of the documents that I've sent you. So if you're wondering about that, you can you can reference, or you can Google in Head Start programs and get that information. But Head Start programs, although not available in every community, they're available in a lot of communities, and in those communities, they must in fact make available their services to include kids with disabilities. And school districts can work with them to provide the support that's necessary to make it more successful. So I've talked a lot about social stories the last 3 weeks, and I wanted to provide you with some examples of social stories. So these are just some examples. My parents and friends are happy when I am clean. So this is kind of a social story for remembering to wash my hands. This is a good one actually for COVID, since we're supposed to be washing our hands a lot. And then, you know, this is a birthday party one. That can be confusing if you haven't been to a lot of birthday parties. The birthday person is the one that's going to get the presents. And even though I brought a present, I don't get to open it. It's to be giving it to the child whose birthday it is. So a little social story on birthday parties. And then because Halloween is coming up, and I don't know if we're trick-or-treating or not, because I hear different things that we're not trick-or-treating, but maybe for those that are going to trick-or-treat, tonight is trick-or-treat, I'll put on my costume and I'll go knock on the door and say trick-or-treat, and then I'll maybe get some candy, and there'll be some scary things, and it may look a little bit spooky. Halloween can be great fun. So just a way to help kids make that transition. And then this is, I can go to the park. And this one, my parents and teachers and friends do not like me when I put my hands in my pants. Well, I don't know if they don't like me. That's probably not a great use of language there. But trying to keep them from putting their hands in their pants is an important skill to learn as you get older. And then when I'm frustrated, here are some things I might be able to do when I'm frustrated that would be socially acceptable. It's not okay to say to kids, you can't be frustrated, but it is okay to say to kids, you can be frustrated, but there are ways in which you can express your frustration. And then there are ways that are not acceptable to express your frustration. And then here's some examples of some picture schedules that I found on the web. I wanted to talk a little bit about the first and then this, because sometimes that's all a kid needs. First, if I finish this activity, then I get a break. And so it might just be that if I finish whatever I'm doing, I put the puzzle together, and when I'm finished with putting the puzzle together, I can play with my squeegee ball, which may be a highly preferred activity for a child, and we want to get to that. And then these are just examples of other pictorial schedules. And frankly, in preschool settings and in kindergarten settings, and maybe even in the primary grades, I have found these pictorial schedules to be beneficial to all kids, because kids don't always know what's coming next. And then examples of picture word choice boards that children use. So here's the leisure one on the right of our arts and crafts. I can go on the trampoline, I can chill out, I can work on the computer. And then the other one on the first one on the left that's green, it says when I'm upset, I can. And then this would be, you would fill in what is appropriate for that setting. Examples of visual communication systems. Probably most preschoolers won't be using electronic systems, but they might be using some pictorial systems, especially if they don't use words to speak just yet. And so here are just some examples. I included this because I think that sometimes we get hung up on fidgets because we think that fidgets distract the child. The truth is, for some kids, these fidgets actually help the child to maintain their focus. So I've just given you some examples of some fidgets that might be of interest for a child who it helps them. So when they're sitting on the carpet listening to a story, and that may not be engaging enough to keep me focused, but if I have my hands moving and busy, then I can keep my focus. And so playing around with fidgets and looking at how they might interfere with learning, which wouldn't make sense, or how they might help with learning, which does make sense. And then I want to end with a beautiful video that I tried to play the first week, but it didn't work, but now I figured out how to play it. So here's my last video, and then I have one more slide, and then we'll just take the last minute question. So I love that video because it just shows you when we give children the opportunity to be connected, that they see the essence of each other and they get the essence of each other. And so her brother gets her because obviously the family has established the idea that we are one family. So all of this boils down to being bold, being courageous, and being consistent, building bridges, building relationships, building quality inclusive programs, partnering with teachers, parents, related service people, and community members. It requires all of us to work together. So I want to thank you all for participating in this training. It's been a little awkward. It's my first webinar I've done on Zoom, but I've learned a great deal thanks to the Westside Regional Center Family Resource Center staff. So thanks again for coming, and I'm here to take more questions. We still have a few minutes left. So Liz or whoever. Liz, I can't hear you. I can see you talking, but I don't hear you.
Oh my gosh, I've got my mute off too.
You're not coming through, Liz.
Liz, can you hear me?
I can hear Areda.
Go to your computer and where it says the language, make sure you're on English and see if that'll allow her to hear.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Woo! Okay, there was a couple things that came up, Mary, and I wanted to kind of partner with you a minute. Some of the questions, one or two of the questions that hadn't been addressed, and I kind of wanted to bring my own son into it, and since you know that situation, you can kind of piggyback. There was a comment or question about children in an inclusive preschool who were, you know, being nice, but more babying. And I wanted to bring out an experience that we had with Jace, and I believe it was via your suggestion years and years and years ago. Number one, as a mom or a dad, I want you never ever to be afraid to approach the children in your children's classes, no matter how young they are, 3, 4, 5. Present yourself as a safe place for them to ask questions. I would always go in every year and I would say, you can ask me any question, you can make any comment. I'm here to answer as good as I can. Oftentimes I would take a book like Mary recommended I do, like Rainbow Fish, where it is such a beautiful demonstration of friendship and acceptance and difference. And then we would talk a little bit about what makes us all alike, what makes us different. And without a doubt, we're so much more alike than different. We have 2 eyes, we have 2 arms, you know, we have a big smile on our face. We like pizza, you like cheese, I like pepperoni. So we still like pizza, but we like different things on it. What are some of the things that are alike? Children would say, why does your son talk like he does? And I would say, you know, Jay struggles to talk, but he's learning so much by being with you, and you're such great talkers, and he loves this part of it. And thank you for helping him learn to talk better. And that would just give them such relief. They would ask me if they could catch what he has. And I would say, absolutely not. There is no way that you will catch what he has. But I never had a negative experience. Jace never had a negative experience because we answered their questions and we gave them information. And oftentimes they would say to me, well, you know, sometimes I feel different too. And it would just be a great opening. And I want to invite all of the moms and dads and teachers, please open up those lessons to include that, because when you give little children information, you see a comfort come over them and an acceptance that will stay with them and make them so much more confident. And I just wanted to answer that question with you there, Mary.
Yeah, and let me just add a little variation on that theme. When Michael was in 2nd grade, there was a period of time where especially the girls were treating him like a baby, and they were talking baby talk to him, and he was responding. He was fine with it. But I was uncomfortable with it, and I think the teacher was uncomfortable with it. So she asked me if I would come in and help the kids understand. So what I did that year was Michael had a dentist appointment, so his mom took him to the dentist, and I went into the classroom while he was at the dentist. He wasn't there because I wanted to give them permission, like Liz said, to ask whatever they wanted and not hurt his feelings. And so I got a couple of kids to role play being treated like a baby. And then I said to them, so how does that make you feel? And they said, it didn't feel good. I felt like I was a baby and I didn't like being treated like that. And so just having that time, and I'm not kidding you, it nipped it in the butt, so to speak. It took care of treating him like a baby. They never did again. In fact, they would make comments on the playground when I went out there that, Michael knows how to do this and Michael knows. So they started looking at what his strengths were rather than focusing on the fact that he didn't talk exactly like the rest of them. They were really focusing on the things that he did well. So yeah, I would definitely, and the Rainbow Fish is a great book. I actually that day read a different book to the kids. It's hard to find this book, and this book needs a lot of nurturing around it. It's called Someone Called Me a Retard Today and My Heart Felt Sad. And it is one of the hardest books to read without crying, because it goes through and talks about how that happens. But then the book turns around and talks about how many things the child could do. And he did them, he had chores around the house, and he did things around the house to help his dad out. And I also love this book because it's a relationship primarily between a son and a father, and mom's not around. So it's nice because it gives a role model for a dad. But it's a hard book to find. I can't seem to find my replacement, and I've lost my copy of it because I've loaned it out so many times. But it needs to be done carefully, where Rainbow Fish is a familiar book to most kids. They've read it, they understand it, they get the whole scale thing, that Rainbow Fish has different kinds of scales, and they make an accommodation in the book just so that he can still play tag with them. So I love that book.
Mary,
Okay.
I don't see any more questions. I do see a lot of thank yous. And Ryan Duncan would wanted me to say hello to you.
Hi, Ryan.
But I wanted to let our folks know that we will be sending out kind of a cluster of ideas. We'd love to continue going forward with this in whatever way we can. We'd like to know different topics that you would like us to bring in, like building friendships, facilitating friendships, parent-professional collaboration, building that relationship. Oh, I do have a question. Anyway, so let me finish this. So you'll be getting a series of ideas. If you could please click on, what topics you'd like us to explore next. And we're gonna continue to open these up statewide. This is so important, it really is. I have a question from Evelyn who says, what are your thoughts? It would help if I had the questions in a different area so I can actually read them. And then
I actually have it, I can read it. What are your thoughts when an IEP team will not change their mind about this special day class recommendation when the parents are pushing for general ed placement? I'm sorry, I have motorcycles out in the background on my street. Hopefully they're going away. What resources can parents provide IEP teams regarding general education placement benefits regardless of a child's needs? So this is a very difficult question. Ultimately, you want to try very hard to help educate the school and the staff in the school, because sometimes they've only seen self-contained special education settings. They've never seen an inclusive setting. So using some of the videos that I've shared with you, going on YouTube and looking for others, is helpful as a way to kind of see it. Missouri used to have on their license plate the Show Me State. I kind of think we're all in that place where showing me is really important, because talking about it theoretically doesn't work for me. So giving them some real visual, or if you know of an inclusive preschool in your community, going for a visit and taking them with you to go for the visit and let them have their questions. Let them offer the idea of what their fears are. That's the biggest thing, is what are your fears that might happen if we actually make this come about. Unfortunately, sometimes that still doesn't convince people, and so there are other processes that you have available to you. Parents have a right to mediation or due process hearings if necessary, and bring in a lawyer with you if you need to. There are an awful lot of attorneys out there who will work for the idea that they're pro bono, and the idea that they're confident they're going to win, and then the school district's going to end up having to pay their fee at the end. So you're not having to actually fork out the money ahead of time. So I think just keep talking about it. Look for other parents. That's why going to the SEAC meeting, the Special Ed Advisory Committee meeting, you might meet parents there who have had their kids in inclusive preschool programs, and bringing those together as much as possible. Sharing with them some articles, some of the documents that you're going to get on the list of great internet sites would be really helpful. It is the law. It isn't the law about your child, it's the law about children with disabilities. And so it's not written for an individual child, it's written for all the children. But we must provide the least restrictive environment, which we know at this point that for the overwhelming majority, if not all preschool children, is in an inclusive preschool setting.
And I also want to include in this, Mary, briefly, I want to say to all the folks out there, I was one of those parents who was so unprepared. And I couldn't figure out most of what was always coming at me, fast and furious. I had to go with my gut. And my gut told me this is how my son would learn the best. It just told me that. And then I had great people like Mary in my life who kind of said, yes, this is. I really got a lot from organizations like TASH, TASH, really groundswell. I'm just a huge national organization that really follows people from birth through the life cycle and the importance of folks being included in all aspects of their life. I also would recommend organizations like if you have a child with Down syndrome, Club 21 in the Pasadena area that has a very vibrant website, wonderful resources, really a lot around including young children. Go to organizations that don't necessarily have to be disability focused, but really the idea of inclusion, and there are a lot of them out there. And, find like-minded people. There are many more of us out there than we even know about. And you have those really successful parents who've included their children, and have them come and be a part of your IEP and say, hey, listen, this can be done. You've done it before. We're a great example of it. Really focus on the benefits and not, because you can't prove a negative, right? You can't, this has never been done. Of course it's been done. I also guarantee you that unless, and I don't believe I'm wrong, but especially in our larger districts, you will not ever be the first person who has asked for this. You will be amongst many, and there are many who have gone before you. And so let them know, hey, listen, I know you've done this and done it successfully. Let's do it again. It's such a beneficial experience for everybody involved. And I'm not saying that it's not going to be challenging, but I am saying that I guarantee you it is worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Let me just add, Liz, that the reference to Club 21 in Pasadena, it's not only serving the Pasadena area. They serve really all of California because some of the stuff is actually online. And so they're a wonderful resource.
Mary, it looks like there might be more questions, but they're not showing up on my screen. I'm sorry. Do you see any more?
No, I think they're just comments.
Okay. I do want to remind you all again that you will be getting a list of options for going forward with other trainings. Please send those back to us, and you will be getting the information on the certificates. I know that many of you were concerned about that, and that will be followed up on. And then the slides, continue to send us questions. We are here for you, and Mary, I want to take a second and just really elevate Rhiannon Maycumber. To say that we could not have done this without her is such a huge understatement. We're so blessed to have the partnership of Westside Regional Center, and she has been a guiding light. And my deepest, deepest gratitude to you, Rhiannon, for walking beside us, and we'll try to continue to get better. And
you're welcome. We can make it happen.
And also, on behalf of the Family Resource and Empowerment Center and Westside Regional Center, our deepest, deepest gratitude and appreciation goes out to Mary for really giving us the best, not only the best information, the best support. You know, you've been there for a couple of generations of children, Mary, and you have been such a champion for so many of us. And I appreciate so much, all of us do, on behalf of Rita and myself and all of the staff here at Westside. I just want to thank you for giving of your time and your energy and your expertise. Just thank you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you and good luck on your inclusion journey.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you to our wonderful interpreter, Sonia. I could just smile watching your face, so thank you again. Thank you.
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
You're wonderful. Thanks again. Let's keep connected, folks.